Hey guys, it's Graham. What's cracking? Let's talk books about woolly mammoths. Why? Why, Graham? Why? Well, it's the NHL playoffs right now, and since I grew up in Las Vegas and I played roller hockey in middle school, naturally I'm a fan of the Las Vegas Golden Knights. They are in the playoffs again. They just got whacked in the huevos on round one of the game one of round two, whatever. Anyway, we're not talking about that. They're going to be my ride or die team forever. Before Vegas got a team, I was a fan of the Pittsburgh Penguins, so still got a soft spot for them, for Jaromir Jagr, and for all the great memories that he generated for the fan base. But last year, or I guess this year, Utah got its first NHL team. The Phoenix Coyotes left Phoenix, and the brand and the legacy stayed there. And for the first year, I guess Ryan Smith and the other owners didn't know what the heck to call the team. And so they were floating some names around, and there were some lesser ones pitched, and I wasn't excited about any of them. I actually did like Utah Yeti, but they decided not to go that route because whatever. And one of the names that kept getting floated was Utah Mammoth. And mammoths have always been cool to me. Like they're like a not uniquely American, but the fact that we get so many mammoth fossils and that they hold a place in the fossil record of our continent. I just even as a kid, I thought the woolly mammoths were the coolest. Going back to my Dino Riders fandom as a wee lad, there was a series of Ice Age toys, and I always wanted to get the mammoth and never could. But I digress. They announced that they settled on Mammoth as a mascot. I thought, let's talk about a couple of Mammoth books then to recommend to you fine folks. The first one, it's a little bit dry. It's borderline a textbook, but it's a nonfiction about the history of the study of mammoth, and actually this might have been the mastodon, which is a different animal, but generally large elephantids in North America, going all the way back to the era of the founding and the fascination that Thomas Jefferson and George Washington had for collecting bones from these creatures, fist-sized molar bones and so on. There was even an anecdote in there about how when Jefferson sent Lewis and Clark on their expedition to explore the interior, he told them that they were likely going to encounter mammoths that were still living and had just moved into the interior of the continent. Probably my main takeaway from this book, years after I read it, was that it gives you a snapshot of what paleontology looked like over 200 years ago. The approach that popular scientists of the day had toward it. There was a belief that it wasn't possible for animals to go extinct, at least in certain academic circles, because every animal had a vital function to perform in the food chain in the circle of life. And so if one species died out entirely, then an entire ecosystem would collapse. Now, while there are scalable versions of that are true, it doesn't work as a universal hard rule. And there was also a religious overtone to it all. Like, you couldn't say that there were creatures that lived 10,000 years ago because there was still predominantly a biblical view of the age of the earth and the origin of species therein. And so archaeologists and paleontologists kind of had to be careful about how they presented certain ideas when it came to dating these fossils and talking about how long they'd been in the ground. And it was really the discovery of several mammoth fossils in the Ohio country that spurred this discussion along and definitely opened up men at the time to coming up with different theories as to how these bones got there and what they were. It was also not uncommon for people to find maybe partial skeletons and completely misjudge like what these creatures looked like and how they walked. You might have seen a meme floating around the internet talking about elephant skulls and how, since there was that giant hole in the middle of the skull for the trunk, for the breathing apparatus and stuff, people would look at that and make comparisons to it with a human skull and think that this was a cyclops skull and that this wasn't where the nose was, this is where the eyeball was. I don't know how true that is. It all sounds kind of apocryphal, but if you're interested in a lot of the nitty gritty type stuff, you could check out American Monster, because in addition to an analysis of, I guess, like paleontology specifically as it relates to mammoth skeletons, you get this snapshot of what paleontology looked like in the early days and the developing days of the science back in the 19th century. I'm going to make kind of a negative recommendation for this book, Mammoth by Ben Mesrick. This is probably like the third book that I've read by this guy. And he's like, how would I explain this? It's like, Dr. Phil is like a pop therapist or counselor or whatever. He's not a guy necessarily who provides real science as much as he is a guy that provides content. I feel like Ben Mesrick is that version of a nonfiction author. And with the couple of books of his that I read, I'm like, you know what? I think this guy just kind of sucks. Even though the subject was interesting, he didn't really have a thesis to present. It was more like if he had written 4 somewhat disconnected articles that all just happened to be about mammoths and were for a long-form website. Okay, sure. It didn't really amount to much as a book, and it was kind of the book that made me decide, like, I'm not all that interested in reading anything by Mesrick ever again. However, I did do that thing at a comic book store last week that I like to do, where I peruse the shelves and I find something that I had not heard of before, but that I would want to buy at a glance. And there's this graphic novel called The First Americans. Interestingly enough, it was near the G.I. Joe Silent Mission issues, which are just comics that don't have any dialogue or anything. It's just like you watch the action and you interpret from the story what's going on. This one is, there's one line of dialogue in the entire thing, but it's focused on, as you might guess from the title, the first humans that crossed the Bering Strait from Siberia, chasing game trails and stuff, and ended up in North America. And without there being really much dialogue or any words to it, you get the idea of how it depicts these people, how they lived. They lived in caves, they lived kind of communally, and they hunted mammoths. And the book starts with them kind of having an unsuccessful mammoth hunt, and they've got to kind of go where the game is, and things are changing in their environment, and they move with the herds, and they end up crossing this kind of land bridge. The one line of dialogue is a cave woman in this tribe standing up and saying, hey, let's go east. And they end up crossing the strait into Alaska and pursuing the mammoths down there. Artwork was just fantastic in this one. I'll cover more of them as the issues come along, and I'm pretty sure I put that on my pull list and subscribe to the series. I enjoyed that one quite a lot. Final recommendation that I'm going to make is a little bit self-aggrandizing, and this is where I'll segue into a subject that I'm going to do for tomorrow's video. But my book, Sleepless Hollow, doesn't have mammoths as a major plot point or anything, but one of my favorite illustrations in this book, I call it the Horseman's Menagerie. It's where our plucky protagonists end up having to duke it out with a powered-up headless horseman, and for reasons that the story will explain, the headless horseman's horse is gone, but he's got an entire cadre of ghost animals that he can control and summon at will. And when this scene pops up, I have him storming out of the ghost world and onto the mortal plane, dual-wielding shotguns and riding a mammoth ghost, because I don't know, one of the cool things about indie publishing is you can literally just do whatever you want. And especially when you illustrate your own books, you can take your time and draw something really cool. And I was like, well, what would be cooler than the headless horseman riding a horse? Well, he could be the mouthless mammoth man, I suppose. Anyway, relevant because the Kindle edition is 99 cents. It's on sale. Actually, I think I've kind of perma-set that price low. And I've got about a dozen illustrations in that book. And I've also, in that same sale that I'm running with, I've got a 99-cent sale going on the ebook for Howling Wilderness, which is for this week only. No mammoths in that one, but that's why I'm going to do a more complete video about the sale. later on. But anyway, in summary, mammoths are cool. I think it's cool that the state where I used to live, A, has an NHL team, and B, that NHL team has a cool mascot. And, maybe I'll get a jersey or some merch or something. Still a Golden Knights fan, but cool stuff is cool, and I like having cool stuff. I guess I just like liking things, like running over climate protesters. I've been doing that joke for like a year now. I need to find something else to run over. Anyway, drive safe. See you out there.